to the big blur.
Oh, can they hear you?
Until fairly recently, each of the arts was a separate kingdom. Clement Greenberg, the most influential art critic of the 50s and 60s, preached the doctrine that the primary duty of each art was to purge itself of every element that was not essential to its own definition. In other words, painting should concern itself with line, shape, and color on a flat surface and nothing else. This quaint idea started breaking down in the 60s and has virtually evaporated today. Performance, film, video, the internet, fashion, and 100 other tendencies have invaded the visual arts. And the same indiscriminate mashup affects music, theater, literature, opera, you name it. At the same time, we now have art galleries doing museum-quality shows and museums showing new works fresh from the artist's studio, auction houses challenging commercial dealers with galleries of their own and private sales, and even trying to represent living artists. All the old definitions and distinctions are up for grabs, and the increasingly all-powerful art market threatens to turn art making into a global commodity. How do we feel about this? And how does it affect the artists and the art that's being made today? Joining me to explore this world-shaking subject are three distinguished experts, each of whom represents a different aspect of the rapidly expanding art world. Michael Govan, on the end, is the director of the LA County Museum of Art. Before that, he cut his teeth working with Tom Krenz at the Guggenheim Museum and went on to become director of the Dia Art Foundation. He was the driving force behind its spectacular new building on the Hudson, Dia Beacon, and he's one of the art world's authentic visionaries. Amy Cappellazzo, next to Michael, personifies the dizzying energy of the blur. She started out as a curator at the Miami-Dade College Museum, then spent 13 years at Christie's, where she rose to become chairman of post-war and contemporary development. Left in 2014 to co-found a full-service art advisory company, Art Agency Partners. She also played a key role in establishing Miami Art Basel, the coolest and hottest of the international art fairs. Francis Naumann is an independent art scholar, writer, and museum curator. He is one of the world's leading experts on Marcel Duchamp, Dada, and Surrealism. He also works what used to be considered the other side of the fence as a dealer who runs his own gallery, Francis M. Naumann Fine Arts. He's a real blur, although he takes quiet pride in the fact that so far his gallery has avoided the oceans of money that swamp so many of his competitors.
You can say that.
So let's begin. Museums and art galleries used to be like church and state. Separate, certainly not equal. Michael, could you tell us what's the difference between a de Kooning exhibition at Gagosian, organized by MoMA's emeritus curator of painting and sculpture, John Elderfield, with, quote, nothing for sale, close quote, and a de Kooning show at the Museum of Modern Art?
Well, it is in quotes that nothing's for sale. That is true because things can be for sale, things in the back room are for sale, and you know, I think that you have to see museum quality shows of art galleries as a little bit of a side business. It's not the primary business. Otherwise, they would have to deal with all the problems that museums have to deal with, which is raising money and not selling art. But I think that I don't know, I don't think that this blur, which is actually happening very much now, is necessarily a bad thing. I do think that there is a difference in terms of often what museums are willing to invest in terms of time, research, numbers of people. But even that's changing because there are publications coming out of galleries that are rivaling museums and people who work in both areas. So I think the question, there is definitely a blur. I don't know that it's a bad thing. In that particular case of the de Kooning show, probably there was a lot more lead time and planning in the museum show. It was a more diverse group of work, but I don't know that it always has to be one way or the other.
Good or bad, right.
You judge it by the show. There are good shows in museums, there are bad shows in museums, there are good shows in galleries, there are bad shows in galleries.
Absolutely. Amy, what do you think?
Well, I'm a proponent of everything all at once all the time. So I think it's a good thing. I think it's a great thing because there'll be missteps and mistakes within it, but it's progress of one kind or another. And I'm not sure the very orthodox definitions between the professions were intelligent or smart. So I'm happy to see them dissolve.
And Francis? I mean, you do.
I just still wonder every day how Gagosian does it. That's, because they are really high quality shows that are worthy of museum viewers and attendance and audience and everything on it. And I know that it's possibly because he can sell one thing. And one thing at that kind of a high level can pay for the show. I mean, I do it on a much smaller scale. And if one thing sells, I'm happy. In almost every show I stage at the gallery, I'm hoping one thing will sell. Sometimes nothing does, but you know, that one thing can pay for the show.
Francis, it used to be that people could say the difference between gallery and museum shows was in the depth of scholarship that museums could bring. Now with John Wilmerding doing shows with Acquavella and John Richardson doing Picasso shows on a regular basis with Gagosian, Rob Storr doing the same thing on occasion at Zwirner, and writing catalog essays, where's the difference?
I don't think there is much of one. If the scholarship is there, it's there. And they always, you know, if a gallery, for example, can't show certain things because they can't borrow them, the art historian still is allowed to reproduce it in the catalog and discuss it. So in the end, you can produce a similar product, I would imagine. I mean, I'm sure there are exceptions.
Could it be said that perhaps museums take scholarship too far? Producing 2-ton catalogs with a dozen or more academic essays that are read by less than a dozen people? And the kind of books that Mark Twain described as once you put them down, you just can't pick them up.
I'm guilty of that myself.
Oh, you are?
Yes, of having produced such a book. But I don't care. I don't care who reads my books. There's an author who once said he gains readership one reader at a time. And I don't care if they're even alive yet. So for me, it's irrelevant. And I think they can produce equally high quality catalogs, just like museums.
I remember Leo Steinberg was upset that he said only 6 people bought his book.
Oh, he
many of
always
his books.
exaggerated.
Right. Right. Amy, a lot of dealers complain that auction houses are out to take over their market. At the same time, we hear that the big auction houses are in trouble because their profit margins are too small. What's really going on in the auction business and where is it leading?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's important to say this big phenomena of this very large market, particularly for contemporary art, is really about subscription of capital. And the contemporary art market, you could say, was very undersubscribed for a long time. So while it was a smaller market and sort of a couple of families involved and a couple of key galleries on 57th Street or 420 West Broadway, or when it was a smaller art world, now lots of other people want to get in on that, and the market's become bigger, and huge amounts of capital have come in. So that means all the businesses have to change because a big subscription of capital reshapes things. So yes, the auction houses in their auction model are pushing margins very slimmer and slimmer to win marquee business, and that is a problem. I mean, I would say it's kind of the end of something, but hopefully the beginning of something else in that way. Like that business model won't sustain itself in a huge way. But more and more you're seeing auction houses. I used to walk around, Chris said, stop calling us an auction house, we're an art business. And it was really important that we see ourselves as an art business. And it's a huge growth industry. I mean, there's plenty of ways to expand and grow. But it does mean reconfiguring things and changing the format of things, which I suppose, of course, private sales is a part of it, online sales, there's many ways
all of that.
Expand.
And you were instrumental with online sales, bringing in
private sales, all this.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Right. I mean, the auction is still a very key part of the business, and auction is sort of the major liquidity event that brings transparency to the market in some way. There's like sort of price discovery in public at auction, and that's a very, very important mechanism for the market. So Christie's and Sotheby's should always be auction houses in addition to larger businesses, but I think it's a moment of flux for all of them, and I'll throw Philips in the mix there too, because they have, actually at the moment, they have the most old hat experienced CEO. And so, you know, they all have to rethink it and figure out the best way to transform the business so that it can grow in the next round. I mean, oddly enough, they're very conservative businesses, despite the fact that they're in the art world.
And what about representing artists, trying to represent artists? I mean, they certainly do that with the States, but trying to represent artists?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll see more and more of that. And I think artists, or particularly artists' estates, will be attracted to that more and more because of the global reach, because of an infrastructure of understanding how auction works and how to sort of buoy an artist's career through a rough patch at auction. I think you'll see more and more of it.
Thank you. Michael, what about private museums, which seem to be popping up everywhere, from the Broad opening across the street from LA MoCA to Glenstone in Maryland and many, many more. Does this make life more difficult for established public museums like yours?
Well, that question was asked at the last session, and the world's big enough for all of them. I mean, there's been a strong tradition for many, many years, decades, centuries of private museums too. I think the question may be underlying the blur, or if there's, like Amy, I like to have a lot of diversity of activities. I'm not afraid of change. But there is an underlying question that people have asked about all of this money moving to galleries and auction houses. Are the museums suffering from that, from the private collectors who are sucking the work and the money out of those public collections? Only time will tell. It is a question for our society in the sense that what Larry Gagosian's not doing, as much as we love him and those great shows, is establishing a collection over many, many, many generations and many decades and many centuries that people can come back to. Things go out of fashion, things come back into fashion. He usually doesn't do big shows of out-of-fashion things. He might bring something into fashion. But there's this need, I think, in our society for these structures that are a little less sexy. Where
like
you
Noah
keep
Poravoy,
where you're showing Noah Poravoy, who is not a big market artist, or where you're just spending the large part of the money we spend at a museum you don't even see. It's in the back. It's taking care of works that need attention. It's research and scholarship that doesn't see the light of day immediately. So there is a question in our society if all the money and power gets sucked into the present, the new, the contemporary. Will museums be sustainable? I'm an optimist, and my belief is they will be sustainable, and we can stand the onslaught of all this money going other places, but it is a question. And what's heartening is to see shows like yours, Francis, where you do museum quality shows where you don't care if 5, 10, 15, or 1,000 people, the role that a lot of museums say they like to play, but you're always thinking about what's possible. So the blur's
It's
good and bad.
wild idea. Will museums and galleries ever merge? Could the galleries become the sales department and provide funding for exhibitions? Could the auction houses act as an editing process and help with storage? I mean, if we think about the future, can you see that happening? Is that something nuts?
I think we're trying a lot of new things. I think that there's a lot of people who say you have $1 billion, $2 billion, $5 billion, $10 billion, $20 billion of collections, and you're still raising money. Why don't you just sell something? Right? Everybody says that. Who doesn't hear that all the time? But there's a little bit of a problem with that blur, because if we do that, first of all, those works that were mostly gifted by people who didn't think that would happen to them. So there is this little question of fairness to intention of donors, which I think if you want to change the rules, you should change them going forward. Ask the new donor if it's okay if you sell their work later to pay for some bathrooms and an auditorium, and see if they give you the work. That would be the way to do it, is going forward. And I think you can kind of get a sense of the problem right there, is then what would happen if you blur those lines and you can sell and use that money. Because there is something like this repository of things, just like you need auction houses to be auction houses, because if you get rid of the auction market, how will you establish trade? So we can blur, but we can't entirely blur, otherwise the system does have the potential to come apart.
Right.
But something really big is happening that, I just want to say, like, this, you said something, Michael, about the capital, that money is flowing so much into the gallery world and into the auction houses, but it's also flowing into the museums. I mean, you're doing a huge building project, like the enthusiasm for art and the sort of patronage that's going on is completely unprecedented at this scale.
In big cities, it is pretty good, yes. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I think there's room for both. I was just trying to state the question. And I think the more difficult question is the question of why don't you just sell the art to fund the building? I think that's kind of a no-win proposition when you really look at it carefully. But you see article after article. There was an article published just 2 months ago that was circulated everywhere that suggested exactly the same thing. So, and like if you just dissolved auction houses, you would lose your fair marketplace. Not that they're always fair marketplaces, but.
Right. In an unindexable, unregulated market, or minimally regulated market, they serve as the liquidity events for the marketplace. Yeah.
But I guess if you take it one step further and say that, I mean, that if the galleries didn't have to represent artists anymore and there were agents, like EMI, for instance, like the writer's system, maybe it turns into something that we just don't know it. It might not be the system that we know right now. Galleries become something else. I mean, something like Gagosian has he can move faster, he can get John Elderfield, he can get John Richardson, whatever, to write, and the kind of quality that's happening. I guess what's missing in some of those things is time. And time is something that the museum has and provides. And how important is time in the cooking of these things?
Well, just on time, I think that, again, different systems need, if there has to be an ecosystem of different systems. When a average billionaire gets frustrated with the museum because they don't like the decision process because they're used to making their own decisions, and so they're going to make their own museum. Probably heard that story.
Yes.
But again, they're really good at that during their lifetimes, and that's the way they do it. And then we all die, and there's this idea of why do we build institutions in this other imperfect way with these slow bureaucracies? We do it because we as museum institutions are meant to maintain a certain level of quality over a very long time and through multiple generations with a certain certainty. So again, I think that every system is designed for different positives, but maybe we can't collect as quickly or make those decisions. So obviously we need an ecosystem of many different kinds of approaches.
I'm going to go back to John Elderfield because his situation seems so relevant to everything that we're talking about here. While continuing to work with Gagosian, he's now become an endowed curator and lecturer at Princeton University and at the Princeton Museum. He's also at work on the first ever Cézanne portrait show, which is going to open at the Orsay in Paris, travel to the National Portrait Gallery in London, and then end up at the National Gallery in Washington. And I guess it appears that these institutions see no problem between his curatorial and his commercial affiliation.
I think it's like politics, where like you did your service and now you get to make money when you leave politics, and then you can get like a job at a fancy law firm and be a lobbyist and kind of do your thing, and then you get a faculty appointment somewhere. Like I think
John.
it's kind of what we're doing now in the art world.
With John, but of course, John's personal integrity makes that possible. But is that opening the door to potential conflicts of interest?
Conflicts of interest are almost always construed. They're not actual.
Oh,
I mean, when
jealous.
you break it down, I can't imagine that John Elderfield on any single level is writing what he writes in order to, grace his pocket. I don't think that's happening.
Not John.
Yeah, well, no, other situations too. People always perceive it, and it's not actually happening. In more cases than not, it doesn't really happen. When it does, you catch them and put them in jail. But otherwise.
But then why is it that dealers aren't allowed to be on boards of museums? Or then,
Well, a dealer became the director of a museum.
well, I'm getting to that.
Oh, all right. Okay.
I'm not sure that's so smart.
I'm not so sure it's smart
I don't
either.
think it's smart at all.
I mean, we're seeing the.
It's like a board of a company. We would like no one on the board who is an expert in this industry. We don't want anyone who has a
Right,
bit of market knowledge for
exactly.
our company. It's like-
Exactly. Good point, Amy. Right. Michael, what about
I don't
that?
have any problem with it other than you have to have buy-in from there has to be trust and buy-in from everyone. Otherwise, the system does dissolve. And there are a lot of regulations about nonprofit 501c3 governance and conflicts of interest. So the government has gotten very clear about all of that. It has to be very upfront, stated, documented, and there are questions about that in terms of just financial nonprofit governance. But I don't think that it's a foolish thing to do depending on who it is, because again, it's not foolish to have John Elderfield do that because people see his integrity. They don't see him on the floor selling artworks. They see him doing what he does, which is the research and the work. So I think it's just a question of who and when, and there are actually, Jamie's on the board of the MoMA. There are examples of
Jamie
people.
Niven.
Jamie Niven's on the board of MoMA.
Just
so there are
retired from
examples.
Sotheby's.
Right. But is an auction house considered different in that sense?
It was in the old school way. It was thought to be a little bit more clean and white glove,
White glove.
little, not quite as sullied as a dealer. Not quite the trader, but it's the same thing.
You can see the conflict, though. If you have a contemporary art dealer, one dealer on the board of a contemporary art museum, and you don't have others, that's a clear conflict in some sense that I think people would worry about that.
Well, what if he had to recuse himself from selling the museum anything or any of his artists showing there? He probably wouldn't take the board seat, right? So
That's right.
So it's self-selecting conflict of interest
That's
or
right.
not. So
Yeah, a lot of gallerists would want to be on those boards.
right, but some might feel that sense of service, and it's a worthy trade-off.
Yeah.
What about the proliferation of art fairs and biennials and the confusion between them? I remember at Vogue a year or two ago, somebody came back from being at Miami Basel and said to me, "You wouldn't believe how commercial Miami Basel has become."
Yeah.
And I realized that she didn't realize the difference because
Right.
she wouldn't. She grew up in a time when the blur had happened. And Peter Sheldal coined the term festival art made on the premises for an event, or post-studio art. But art becomes a spectacle and not an object for contemplation in that sense. What do you think
I hate the
about-
morality of that statement, actually.
You do? Okay, talk about it.
But I just feel like there's such a moralism about how someone enjoys something. And I think that's just absurd. Like, you're not really enjoying it in the way that I want you to enjoy it, or that I think this should be enjoyed.
Okay, yes.
Or, you have your hands in your pockets and are scratching your nose while you're looking at, like, I don't really know what that means. Like,
And doing a selfie.
People engage and connect and feel appreciation and passion for works of art in different ways, in different settings, and I think there's a sort of morality to that one way is better than another way. I think art is defined by the context in which you see it, so sometimes works of art are compromised in one setting or another setting. That's an interesting intellectual argument, qualitatively, about whether the piece was best presented in that setting or not. But there's the moral idea of like how someone enjoys something or whether or not they're enjoying it correctly, I find makes me nervous.
But what about art fairs and art biennials? I mean, these lines are crossing. Does it matter if it's about commerce or not about commerce?
I've been doing Art Basel Miami for 8 years, and I did it without any problem for the first 3 years, and then I got a letter from their committee saying that if I was going to include any of the contemporary artists I had been showing, they would kick me out of the fair. Because I was let into the fair basically with dead artists. They wanted somebody who had good dead artists.
Right.
And
Now you can't show.
but now I can't. But my idea was to introduce those artists so that they could get a name. But they wanted, if I bring an artist who's famous and alive, they don't care. They look the other way. But he has to be famous, because they don't want anyone to pay their $26 admissions or whatever it is and go in and not see what they think is quality, and what they think is quality is a big name. So they're part of the whole corrupt system that makes some artists completely ignored and other artists more famous than they deserve to be, maybe.
Amy, what do you?
Well, I mean, the souk model of an art fair is like, it's kind of what it is, really. It's sort of a souk thing. So what they're aiming for, and I'm not, I did work, full disclosure, I worked for Art Basel and helped set up the Miami Fair and was involved in lots of the early conversations in the first the first kind of false start year because it was just following 9/11. It was supposed to be, December of 2001, which was canceled. But the idea is that they don't want to see repeating things, so you don't want too many spice merchants that have curry. You want people to mix it up in there. So similarly, you have a reputation well burnished for excellent dead artists, we could say, and they want to make sure that you bring those artists because they're curating you because they're curating the whole thing. So it's layers of aesthetic control across the board. I'm not sure it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's the.
I'm thinking, my brother has a gallery, and I'm thinking of borrowing just one Rembrandt and putting it in the booth, and seeing how long I last.
Right, that's good.
They might think you're your brother, too. Because
Yeah,
you're
that's
identical twins.
Yeah, I don't know. I've had many opportunities to totally destroy his reputation, but
Good brother. Jeffrey Deitch and Mocha. It didn't seem to work too well, but could it be a precedent? It wasn't a bad idea given the fact that Kirk Varnedoe tried to hire him long before he became a dealer to be head of contemporary at the Modern, before Rob came on board. So, I mean, the question about this, the question of a gallery dealer becoming director of a museum.
I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with it. And Jeffrey's like a very skilled, great enthusiast who's been part of the art world for a long time.
Right.
I think it's just a skill set question always, that it's hard to know across the lines from one business to another what it really is inside. And so you never know. You never know. You never know when you hire somebody whether there's the fit issue. Because Jeffrey has amazing qualities. But the work of being a museum director is a complicated thing, and it's not like running your own gallery because you don't actually make decisions. You cajole people. You have a faculty, they all have opinions. You have a board, they all have opinions. You have you have to coordinate, and it's not like running a gallery or your own space. So I think it's just a question of, I don't think there's anything morally wrong with it. And I agree, the moral questions get very difficult because there's so many possibilities in all of this mashup. I think that there is one thing, though, because I think I have to stand up for the little bit of the conservative side about the blur, is that the art market and art history are two different things. They're not the same thing. And I think there's a lot of pressure in the world and the media to understand to see them as the same thing, so that if a price is high, the artist is good. All that's required for this navigation of these worlds is to understand that the nature of history and influence and effects over a long time are not the same as the market. Now, they do converge at moments, and then they diverge.
Part of the history of art is the history of connoisseurship.
Well, but it's a lot of things. It's also artists looking at other artists and picking out of history, because we always read history backwards, right? An artist of the present can make us look at the work of the past in a different way, as T.S. Eliot so brilliantly described in his own writing about writing in any new work of art. So I think the thing is it's a complicated thing, because there can be some losses in the short term. Artists can get pushed out of the scene that would be valuable and exciting for us to see and have around if the system pushes too far in one direction. But again, I'm not worried about it, because I think, as you're saying, all of us are playing our different roles. So I play the big public museum role, and I'm supposed to play that role and create that energy, and then everybody else can. But I think there is a danger, as there is in anything, and that is that we would lose as a society access to a lot of creative things if we equate the art market with art history, and that becomes too dominant.
I have this theory that with the popularity of the art market and people, it's a little bit like when the stock market became very in vogue and the average Joe on the street was buying Apple stock or something. Okay, so there's this kind of, like the way New Yorkers are about real estate. Like, how much is that? Would you pay for that? What's that? That the sort of frenzy and freneticness of wanting to know prices of works of art could become more broadly known and understood, and then people would go into museums and know the value of things. And that would be, I mean, I always think, because I know the value of things in a museum, I just think it's another way to know something. I don't really think it's a bad thing. Sometimes, like, I have to turn that sound off in my head of pricing the room, but it's just another way to know a work of art. But it could,
Another way.
It could increase the needs for security. It could change, how often you put things on view. All sorts of things like that.
My brother is an art dealer, and he says he doesn't, he's an old master art dealer. He says he doesn't like to go to museums anymore because you can't buy anything.
See, that's coming from the old guard, right?
Yeah.
It's not just contemporary people.
That's fantastic. I was talking to Charlie Ray, the artist Charlie Ray, about this a while ago. And he said, in the end, who cares about these blurry boundaries? Does it really matter whether commerce gets in bed with scholarship? I'm saying that. It's about the art and what survives and what doesn't. Charlie's an artist who's looking at it over the long haul. He's looking at thinking about the Greek chorus and how that survives today. I think he's right. Probably I think he's right. But what kind of an effect is this great mashup having on the kind of art that's being made today? How does the tremendously lopsided art market affect art and artists? We have the same thing in the art market as we have in the economy in general. A very small number of people exerting enormous control over what gets shown, where it's shown, and who gets to buy it. Amy, could you comment on that?
Well, I guess a lot of that is true. I mean, one of the things I see, I went to a talk earlier about income inequality, and that was about the 1% was obviously talked about a great deal. And I was thinking about the 1% of works of art, because that's something where the market is like self-indexing toward the best examples. So it used to be like in 2007, 2008, before that crash, if like a work by, I'll just say an artist like Lichtenstein, Warhol, Rauschenberg was a $10 million work, then the next one down in quality or type would be 7.5 or 8, 5, 4, 2, like it was stepped market. And you could index it by sort of scale, color, popularity of imagery, etc. Now the one that was 10 is 25, and the next one down is 6. So there's this huge gap. So everybody just wants a superior example. And anything that's a little off or a little bit funky or a little bit like, well, that's a curious example, not really the artist's most iconic, or it's a transitional object, or it's, academic, or something.
It won't sell?
Very tough time. So the market is like, markets always get smarter. And so the market is like self-indexing.
Markets get smarter in pockets of markets,
Right.
as they are as bubbles. But again, you can price a room, but the prices keep changing, and they don't always change up.
No,
That's
they
right.
go
And that's
down
what we
too.
have to remember. And again, I mean, one of the exciting things is I work in an encyclopedic museum. I used to work in modern contemporary all the time. But the thrill when you can acquire a 1776 Edo period screen that was an imperial Japanese screen, that's probably the finest, one of the finest things that was ever made in its time. Extraordinary. And it costs $2.2 million.
Right.
Which you couldn't buy a second-rate.
Right.
You couldn't even buy.
Say it, go ahead, say what you
I
want
won't
to
say.
say.
No, I'm not even going to say it.
Bernard Buffet.
So, but the thing is, that's okay. That's what's exciting about the museum, because, and another thing about it is that the public's interest is not the same as the market's interest. So the 1% of people who can afford these things are driving their interests. I had a billionaire collector complain when his major work of art was at the museum, very expensive, very, very valuable, required other security, but that it wasn't that popular. And it's not the same thing being expensive and being popular. And so
Or being meaningful.
Right, because the prices are being paid by a very, the vote on that price is being made by a super narrow group of people. And so it probably does not reflect the broad consensus. And that's why we do need museums that show broad things, so that those worlds can keep changing and prices can keep going down as well as up as people discover and undiscover things all the time.
And when it's that narrow, if one of those people drops out of the market, then
Yeah, things change all the time.
Thin.
there's nobody. Amy, what about online selling? How is that affecting the auction market?
Well, I mean, I think that we're all adept in being online purchasers of many things. I mean, I remember the first time I gave my credit card online, I was terrified it was going to get fraud. You know, we're sort of way past that now. But I think online sales are very good for prints and photographs, very good for things that you recognize in image and you know what that is going to be. So maybe if you have a proper condition report, you might not need to see it because you know what that example is of that particular Jasper Johns print, whatever it might be. And I think it's very good for works of art up to a certain price point. I still think buying a work of art, like enjoying a work of art is a live experience. There are very few live experiences left in life. Looking at art is one of them. You can guess the others. But I think when you're looking at a work of art, you need to see something to really know it. And so if it's a big purchase for you, if it's something that's an intellectual or emotional stretch, if it's something that seeing live will be a very, very different experience than seeing it on screen, then you probably need to see it live. But do I think prints, photographs, multiples, you know, sort of lower price point things where the kind of, you know, if you buy a little drawing this big from an unknown artist for $1,000, I think a lot of that can go online and should be online.
And should be online. But is it like 100,000 or less?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the break point. But that would be a big number to lots of people, so I don't put that number out there loosely. I mean, most of the trading would happen, let's say, under $20,000.
And I mean, this whole idea. I mean, does blur really matter to you, Francis, with regards to what you're doing? I mean, you're a scholar. You've taught. You do shows that are you know. The question is it something that really
actually,
at this point is relevant, or is it?
I think I'm too old to care.
You're too old to care.
Yes, because whatever happens is going to happen. I have no power over it, so let it happen. I'll have to roll with it or get out of it. That's the only way I can think to handle it.
Well, I think that's a healthy way to be. I'm thinking that I would turn to, unless anybody on the panel has something that they'd like to add or a question.
Just one point that I wanted to make, and I'm probably directing it at Michael. Has the unbelievably obsessive interest in cutting-edge contemporary art hurt your ability to solicit some interest in the board members for art, let's say, before 1945?
Yes, I think there's a general, there is a change in that a lot of people with money to be socially relevant, because it's a social world. You want to talk to your friends about what you're doing. You want to have a shared experience, right? You want to have shared knowledge, watch the same TV show and discuss it. So there is an issue there, that we're not seeing as many newly minted patrons or collectors in these other areas. Not none, but that'll change too, because, I mean, I have no lack of optimism because everything is an opportunity. And the more the push goes that way, the more opportunity exists in other areas. Nobody can do everything all at once at the same time. And so while that's happening, you know, we're collecting amazing things. That we bought a Jacques-Louis David portrait for, which was in the Sitter's family since it was made, for a fraction of what a tiny Andy Warhol portrait would be, the size of which there are hundreds, if not thousands. So I don't see it as a lack of effort. It's happening, that's true, but it will push back the other way, I think.
Amy, were you going to say
I
something?
don't know.
Yeah, when?
Well, I mean, I
I'm
think,
You want a
waiting.
time
Yeah,
on
no,
that?
I'm waiting for
I think
it.
since so many people are collecting and there's so much activity in the market, you need a certain velocity and traction of trading to understand. So part of why the other collecting fields, and this was very clear when I was at Christie's, like it used to be the other collecting fields had a particular, were a significant percentage of our overall activity. But those percentages became smaller and smaller because the potential volume of trading was,
Right.
like if you have to wait
It's not
5
a
years to
market.
buy something, you don't really
It's not a
feel so
market.
excited about it, and you can kind of lose interest and move on. So people need, you know, they need activity to call themselves collectors, to feel active, to feel engaged. So that's partially what's driving the contemporary stuff is supply.
Yeah.
I've got one other question for Francis. Do you find that, I mean, like, does it feel like maybe 5 or 10 years from now that there might end up being 3 or 4 or 5 galleries in the world that do it all, big galleries, and it may be Gagosian, maybe Marx, it may be Hauser and Wirth and Schimmel, and it could be Zwerner, but Per Skarstedt. But is there room for the small gallery? And if so, what? What is the role
In
of it?
3 years, I hope to retire. So
Oh,
I won't-
Francis.
I won't care anymore.
That's not the answer.
Well,
Okay.
It seems increasingly that the bigger galleries are getting bigger. I mean, it's inevitable. It's like, the little stores are going out of business and the big box stores are taking over.
It's like Barnes and Noble
Yeah,
or-
and it's hard to stop it. And if someone wants to operate on a smaller level, they have to just find their niche and try it that way. You have to offer something they don't offer, that's all,
who
to
knows?
survive.
Who knows? Maybe museums and galleries will
But
get
I'm,
together.
like I said, that I represent mostly dead artists. I once had a painting by Catherine Dreyer. I don't think anyone here probably knows who she is, but she was the head of at Yale, they certainly do, head of the Société Anonyme. And I offered it to the Philadelphia Museum. They have no paintings by Catherine Dreyer, and she's very important to that museum. But I know, I wasn't at the board meeting. I know that when it was presented to the board, that the 20 people on the board, not one person wanted to support the purchase of this work, which was $125,000. Because the next work being offered was a Bruce Naumann for $3 million, and all 20 hands went up. All 20 hands to buy the Bruce Naumann. Now, I love Bruce Naumann. I mean, he's got my name. We're not related, but
He's only
but
got one N.
Yes, he's one N. But that it seems an inequity that exists. But you can't stop it because those people are in there wanting to be part of history, and they imagine that if the museum managed to forget Catherine Dreyer for its existence, maybe she should be forgotten.
Or maybe for $125,000 they could have done both.
Yeah, that's what I would have liked. So I raised the price and sold it to the High Museum, and they bought it.
Well, there you go. There you
Yeah.
go. Commerce.
What can I-
Commerce.
Yeah.
Very good. We're going to go to questions. And are there any questions? Pepe, here in the second row. Whoops.
That's, you can reverse the order.
Let me pick up on, sorry, this is deafening, on Dodie's question and Francis's answer, which is, and ask how this works for most contemporary artists. I was looking at some statistics about auctions a few years ago, and Amy, you're going to tell me these numbers are wrong, but I hope they're ballpark right. It seemed like there were about 50 artists who trade in the $1 million and up range, and they have a very high velocity of trading. There are lots of trades in Warhol, Picasso, and so forth. There seem to be about another 500 in the $100,000 to $1 million range who trade maybe 5 or 6 times a year. Below that, there are about 2,000 artists who trade, call it $10,000 to $100,000, and they trade once every few years. And now below that, there are the people who don't make it to the market, but by rough calculation from looking at the back pages of Art in America, I would guess there are 20,000 artists in the United States. So will this new blurred system, where it's all Gagosian and all Zwerner and all Christie's, what is that system going to do for those other 20,000 artists?
Thank you.
There's a lot more than 20,000. I've met them.
Right. If there were just 20,000.
They come through the gallery every day.
They want to be represented by
Yeah.
you.
Well, you could say there's more and more opportunity because the art market is becoming more and more about organized pools of capital. And that's why, thus, the big galleries, finding their post and position so strongly. I mean, I would simply say that's, we certainly see many more art and artists than we did 15 years ago, and that's for sure. And many more people are called to be artists and feel like it's worth making a go at it and trying their hand at doing it. What will happen to them? I mean, I guess even if they don't become market stars, if they have other kinds of, I hope they have fantastically rich lives as, I don't know, designing websites and doing, whatever an artist does to get by. But there's only more and more of it, so I see this is, if I were an artist, this would be probably one of the most optimistic times to try to make a living as an artist. I'm not saying it's artistically the most interesting time to be working, but it's definitely the most promising time to try to make a living as an artist.
But as Frank Stella said, that it's like a pyramid. The base gets larger, but the top stays where it
Greatness
is.
is pretty rare.
Yeah, greatness is rare.
Yeah.
Yes.
A couple of comments were made that the margins, profit margins for the auction houses are being squeezed. And yet the buyer's premium, and I'm looking back over a 50-year period of collecting, have gone up and up and up to the point that I think, frankly, they're outrageous. And those are two inconsistencies that I'm curious if somebody would address. And when are these buyer's premiums going to start to level off?
Well, they're just taking it from one side and charging it to the other. You know, there's sort of, you know, but there's, I remember like about 2003, we raised the buyer's premium, and I thought, what's the break point on premium where people will go, you know what, that's just too expensive, I'm just not gonna buy at auction. And I always think about that, like what's the economic break point for each, and I thought that it would be, if you told someone they were buying something for $2 million and the premium were 25%, they'd say no. Like that was just simply, and that's exactly where the premium is right now, you know. So, but it hasn't necessarily deterred. It's not quite there yet. I mean, what I didn't predict in 2003 was how big the market would become and how price points would rise so significantly. So I guess it still has to go higher. I don't see the margins dropping at all. And you know, auction, in order to win the very big marquee business, there are so many giveaways to win that business that the margins are very thin for that. So in effect, those big things that get all the press and capture all the attention are subsidized by lower price point works in the market that are like the bread and butter of the auction house. And buyers at those levels are essentially subsidizing that business.
Any other questions?
I can ask one question that I've always been curious about, and I don't know what the answer is. Are there certain clients who don't have to pay that full premium?
Yes.
So
Well,
on the
let me hear
seller
her.
side, yes. No, I will tell you this. There are certain, you know, think of it this way. If a buyer didn't have to pay buyer's premium, like we used to get people hustling us all the time. So let's take a look at like a big high roller in the room. Every season, 35, 40 years, Bill Aquavella's sitting in the room. You know, he's actually sitting in a skybox every time bidding. Okay. If Bill paid no buyer's premium, the entire art would take 10 minutes before everybody knew that, and every bid would run through Bill Aquavella. So you can't, I mean, they're not that stupid at the auction house that they're gonna, you know, like, so on the buy side, the premium is the premium that way.
So it's never
You
changed.
can finance a third-party deal and get a piece of the
Oh.
premium, but that's
Yeah.
when you're taking a financial position and you're putting capital up as risk. So that's like a different move. But effectively speaking, when the bidding starts, it's democratic. Everybody will pay the same premium. Unless they're the third-party guarantor, that's slightly different. They don't actually get a premium rebate. They get what's considered a fee for having financing.
But I still don't know the answer to his question. Why did it keep escalating? Where did the money go? I mean, is it just moving the funds? They're getting more from another source? Because it's the same thing when some of us are old enough to remember when you went to a restaurant, you left a 10% tip. Well, now it escalated to 15, and there are restaurants where it's 20. What, you're still eating the same food. It's the same, you know, percentage-wise, the same cost as it was 10 years ago, just with inflation added or whatever is added. But why does the percentage go up? I don't know how they got away with that anyway to
It's
begin
because
with.
they blur the
Because-
food.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
they're-
It's all
It's
blurred.
not architect, I mean,
It's all
they're
blurred, I
blurred.
guess, right. Yeah.
That could be it.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the auction houses went from being wholesale operations, 25, 30, you know, when you probably first started collecting back then, where the main audience in the room were dealers, and the auctioneer wouldn't even say if something passed or didn't pass. Like, it was so vague, and you had no idea what was really going on. Then they morphed into sort of being retail operations, and so they are full retail operations now, and very few dealers have the capital to buy, like in an evening sale, for example, for stock. It's just the price points are really, really, really high. So in the day sales, smaller sales they can, but less so. Very few can buy stock in the evening sale when the market's at this level.
yes.
Dr. Moore, I do know for a fact that auction houses make deals to get collections to sell.
Of course.
And that, in the selling end, the playing field is not level.
No, actually, 100%. No, I mean, this is like an infomercial for my business and why I left the auction house, so I should thank you for this, because but basically, for all the businesses that exist in the art world, very few put collectors at the center. So the auction houses have to really, they have to favor the sourcing side. Francis has wonderful clients that he calls dear friends, but he's got to wake up every morning and go, where am I going to get something for sale? Like, that's going to drive his business. If he doesn't have anything to sell his great friends or collectors, he has no business. So, yeah, competing for collections is a very big deal. I represent a lot of people now who want to monetize works of art or collections at a high level and need to know a strategy of how to do it. Sometimes it's at auction, sometimes it's privately, sometimes it's a more complex financing mechanism. So it's become something that required a real professional service and expertise. But yes, auction houses will compete heavily. They have to favor the seller side. I used to spend 80% of my time getting great things for sale and 20% of my time selling them. So that's about the ratio. By the way, when you walk into any great collection, 80% of the value is usually in 20% of the objects. It's the same little 80-20 ratio of life.
Can I ask an ancillary question? Do you break up collections sometimes and sell them in different ways?
Sure. I mean, it depends on the goal. If the goal is to keep the collection together, then that's the goal and that's the premise. If the goal is to monetize it at the highest level, or to sell things in a certain order for tax purposes or whatever, you do what the client needs.
There's time for 2 more questions, so I'm going to say that if anybody in the room has any question they want to ask that isn't even to do with the blur of these 3 people, you're welcome to do so.
Don't be so generous.
Oh, well, because I'm not answering.
On our private lives?
I just asked Michael what his
He
shoe
said
size
Eddie.
was. So
I can't tell you. I can't tell you.
it's too personal.
Linda Silverman, I would like to ask everyone on the panel, including the moderator, if you could change one thing today in the art world, in any area, on any level, what would it be?
That's a good question. Michael, you go first.
You know, I think I can't even think about that because there's so many changes happening all the time, and the thing is to just deal with them. And I personally think change is good, that all these different things create opportunities and ways to think about them. So yes, if somebody would, of course, if the world would, there would be more philanthropy, it would be good. But we would all say that about life, maybe or maybe not. I'm one of the, I still do really believe in museums, and I would say, there was a question earlier about sustainability. The rich are getting richer, and the very big urban museums are doing very well, but there are a lot of questions about the sustainability of the enterprise of not-for-profit museums in general, especially in the middle size. And it is something we may have to pay attention to. I think I talk with my colleagues a lot about this, that everybody sees the big museums doing well, but there underneath is a significant sustainability problem in our field. So if people care about that, and I'm not saying it's MoMA or the Met or even necessarily LACMA, but it's a big issue, and I think that people do need to pay attention, and the headlines are always about the art market. And everybody says, oh, there was a big sale today, that must be great for the museum. I think, no, that's terrible for the museum. Now I can't buy an artwork. Now my insurance rates went up. Now people don't want to give the artwork that they previously were going to give because it's a larger percentage of their family estate. So yes, I always wish for more philanthropy.
I would say, I mean, one thing that sort of lingers in the back of my head is I worry about the art. It's telling me a writer's or moderator, and Jerry was here earlier, Roberta's here. I worry about the critical voice. I worry about criticism. I worry about good journalism, good reporting. It always frustrated me that the New York Times never covered the art market, the art on the business page, ever, ever, ever. Like, only during the antitrust between the 2 auction houses did it make the business page. So that's just a form of reporting. I feel like I worry about young journalists wanting to write about art in any context, in any case. So I think that kind of critical alternative voice is super important in our field.
The only thing I can think to change is the real obsession with contemporary art, because it sounds like an old story, but I had one experience where 2 museum directors came to my brother's gallery when he had a Rembrandt for sale, and both of those museum directors, I don't remember the names, one was from Seattle, the other St. Louis, so you probably figure out who they were, and they had just built wings on their museums. My brother's Rembrandt was 45 million. It was the last historical major Rembrandt that will ever be likely to come on the market. And I asked him how much my brother's painting was 45 million. Each one of their wings were 45 million. So they spent 45 million on their wings, but they don't have neither museum has a Rembrandt to this day. They still don't. And then I asked the next question, how long will that new wing last? What's the average time for a new wing in a museum to last? I came up with 45 years at a stretch. But in 45 years, that Rembrandt, you're never going to buy the Rembrandt.
No.
It's gone.
Always go for the
So,
art.
but they both said in their defense that it's much easier to raise money to build a structure than to have the donor put his name on a label. It's too small.
Wow.
I guess.
I don't know that that's true. I haven't found that to be so often the case. I think it's also a question, if you don't have a place to, there is a question, if you don't have a place to put it, then you're not going to attract gifts. And still primarily, the main source of artworks for museums are donations, not purchases.
Sure.
So the strategy is quite simple. We're rarely going to be, if you can afford one Rembrandt instead of the wing, then you won't have the wing to put the collection in. So the strategy is very simple, that you count on the generosity of collectors to give works. And that's where the obsession with building comes, and it's not misplaced because it works, and you get much more value that way in your collection. So.
Where did the Rembrandt end up?
A private person bought it. He still has it. Maybe eventually. I'll see if I can get him to give it to you.
Last word, what I would like to see change is that I guess that there's just too much on the internet with regards to what's written and what's not checked and what gets out in the world and information that isn't, there's a lot of bad information that gets out and there's not enough, I don't know, it just feels like that's a problem, but we're way over our time. So thank you all
Thank you.
for coming in.
Is it?
Yes.